Hello friends, and welcome to my channel. My name is Haley and I like to read books and talk about them online. And it is time for my January reading wrap-up. I honestly had an amazing start to the year. I managed to read 12 books in January. I am still a little shocked that I got through that many books, but I am very happy about it. I found some new books that I absolutely love. I explored a lot of new genres in January and I had the best time doing it. That was definitely a goal for me in 2026 to start exploring new genres, and I'm so happy that I started the year doing that. It really has been so much fun just discovering all of these new types of books. So if you were thinking about exploring some new genres this year, take this as your sign to do it. Anyways, back to the books I read in January. I read some fantasy romance, dystopian romance, literary fiction, gothic romance, science fiction, and a classic. So it really was the most well-rounded month, and I'm so excited to talk about all of these books with you guys and tell you all of my thoughts. So I started off January by reading Crescent City for the first time, and if you saw my Crescent City reading vlog, you will know how that went. It didn't quite go as I hoped it would. So the first book I read in January was House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas, and I gave this book 3.75 stars. And I'll start this by saying I think this one is my favorite in the whole series. This book was good. It wasn't great. It wasn't terrible. It was just good. I think the premise of this book was very compelling. This is fantasy romance in an urban setting. We have a half-fae FMC, and her life is kind of upended when these murders take place, and she then has to team up with this fallen angel to figure out what happened and find the killer. I was really looking forward to the murder mystery plot in this book, but it wasn't as exciting as I hoped it would be. The writing in this book is really strong, like it is in all of Sarah J. Maas's other books, and there is a lot of detail in this world. So I found that the first 30 to 40% of this book was just a lot of detail, a lot of info dumping, which does make sense. This is a new series, a new intricate world, but even once we got to the middle of this book, I still found the plot was kind of dragging, and I quickly realized that this urban setting and the urban dialogue wasn't really working for me. I have read other urban fantasy books, but in those ones it felt more fantasy forward with elements of urban, whereas this felt full-blown urban. There's a lot of technology in this world, and the dialogue did feel quite modern, which was a little bit cringy for me personally at times. So those are some things that I didn't love about this book, but I really did love our FMC Bryce in this first one. We follow her emotional journey, which really made it easy to connect with her, and I thought the romance in this book was really great. It is a very slow build-up, and the tension and the chemistry was really there, so I really liked the romantic aspect as well. And then by the last 30% of this book, things really did pick up, and that kind of saved it for me. By that point, I was very invested, and I actually did even tear up a couple times. So some parts of this book worked for me, some didn't, but overall I think it is a good book. Definitely not my favorite, but still a good read. So following that, the next book I read was House of Sky and Breath, and I gave this one 3.5 stars. I had some similar issues with this book as I did the first one. Obviously the urban elements still weren't really working for me here. I felt like the plot was lacking more in this one. The middle of this book once again dragged a lot, and I did find myself kind of bored at times. I really don't think this book needed to be 800 pages. I do think it could have been a lot shorter, and we also got some new POVs in this book that I could have done without. I felt like they did not add much to the story, and unfortunately I was not feeling our main couple as much in this book. The build-up in book one was fantastic, but their romance and chemistry fell a bit flat in this one. I also missed the emotional depth we had in book one. This book was definitely lacking that, but what I did like in this book is that we got to explore Rune's character a bit more. He's one of our side characters that becomes more prominent in this book, and I really like his storyline. He's definitely a compelling and interesting character, and unfortunately there was not a lot of shock factor for me with this book because a lot of the twists were already spoiled, which of course is no fault to the book. It just sucks and takes away from the experience a little bit. But that being said, the ending of this book was still really wild. Sarah definitely knows how to write a crazy ending. There's a new plot development at the end of this book, and upon finishing it I was not entirely sure how I felt about it. I don't think I love the ending of this book as much as other people do, so that's unfortunate, but just kind of where I'm at with this one. For me, this was kind of just an average read. And following that, I read the third book in the Crescent City series, which is House of Flame and Shadow, and I gave this book 3 stars. Once again, I have a lot of the same issues in this book as I did in the first 2 books. I will say the first 35% of this one was a lot more action-packed than the first 2 books, so it did capture my attention a little bit quicker, but things kind of went downhill after that. There was a certain plot development in this book that felt kind of underwhelming, and while there were some aspects of this book that I did enjoy, there were many that I didn't. I'll start with what I liked. Once again, my favorite part of this book was Rune. I really loved love his storyline, his character development, and his romance. I actually prefer his romance to the main couple's, which says a lot. Lydia is another side character in this book that I really liked. She has a really great individual storyline. I was really invested in her, and she was my favorite female character. But unfortunately, my issues from book 2 carried over into this one. The plot never fully gripped me, several storylines felt unnecessary, and again there were stretches where I was bored. And I lost interest whenever the narrative switched to 2 of our side characters' POVs, and the frequent POV changes within chapters in this book felt very disjointed. It's kind of hard to stay immersed in the story when we're just constantly jumping back and forth between character POVs in one chapter. And as for our 2 main characters and our main couple, I kind of liked them less and less as this series went on. Some of the cringy dialogue between them really didn't help, but I just felt pretty disconnected from their storyline. Ultimately, I just don't think this series was for me. The urban fantasy setting and modern dialogue often pulled me out of the story, and I really didn't like how the ending played out in this book. That, paired with the ongoing pacing and plot issues, made it hard to stay engaged, despite there being characters and moments that I did enjoy. So like I said, I just think this series wasn't for me. It's not one that I will be going out of my way to recommend, but if you do want to be caught up in the SJM universe, then I would say yes, this might be worth the read. Okay, moving on from Crescent City, the next book I read in January was We Who Will Die by Stacia Stark, and I gave this book 5 stars. I loved this book. This is a Roman-inspired fantasy romance. It is the first book in what I believe is going to be a series, and in this book we are following our FMC Arvel. She basically makes a magical vow to kill this ancient vampire emperor in order to save her brother, and to do so she must compete in a deadly tournament called the Sundering to join the Emperor's elite guard. This book was addictive, action-packed, and it truly felt like Gladiator meets the Vampire Diaries. We have a Roman-inspired world with vampires, gods, and magical creatures, a deadly competition, high stakes, unique magic, complex characters and relationships, and 2 vampire brothers. If you're like me and you love the Vampire Diaries, this one's for you. The writing is great, the pacing is perfect, and I think Stacia did a wonderful job crafting this world and magic system. In this world we have powerless mundanes, sigil-marked individuals who can wield magic based on a structure of sigils, gold, silver, and bronze, and of course we have vampires. Our FMC Arvel is layered, flawed, and deeply human. She felt very authentic, and it was so easy to root for her. She has a heartbreaking backstory, but she remains a very resilient character. Themes of grief, loss, sacrifice, and survival are beautifully woven throughout this story, along with an emphasis on the role of the eldest daughter and the weight and responsibility that comes with it. Now, the romantic tension and yearning in this book had me squealing. 2 vampire brothers, and honestly I was down bad for both of them. But look, the dark, seductive, morally gray, misunderstood vampire will steal my heart every single time. I thought this book was fantastic, and I cannot wait to see how things play out in this series. So if you're a romantasy lover, you should definitely pick this one up. The next book I read was I Who Have Never Known Men by Jacqueline Hartman, and I gave this book 5 stars. This is such a powerful and thought-provoking read, and I have truly never read anything like this before. The best way I can describe this book is unsettling, melancholic, and strangely compelling. This is a very short dystopian novel, and the story is narrated by an anonymous young woman who is imprisoned underground in a cage with 39 other women, and they have no memory of why or how they were imprisoned. I'm not going to say anything else about the plot of this book. I feel like this is one you should just go into not knowing much about. Despite our main character knowing nothing other than confinement, her narration is strikingly thoughtful, and while this is a very bleak story, there is a slight feeling of hope woven throughout it. This book made me think so much about life, death, love, human nature, the meaning of existence, and I found the prose and the story itself incredibly captivating and insightful. I Who Have Never Known Men is a speculative, ambiguous dystopian novel that will leave you pondering long after you finish reading. This is one that has really stuck with me. I cannot stop thinking about this book, the ending, the experience of these characters, but do not go into this expecting a happily ever after. This is just a very philosophical story. Like I said, it is very ambiguous. It leaves you thinking and wondering, but I personally love a book like that where I'm left thinking and kind of coming up with these conclusions on my own. But this was just so fascinating and thought-provoking, and I cannot recommend this book enough. Next I read Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, and I gave this book 5 stars. This was my first full classic novel as an adult, and I absolutely loved it. This was a dark and haunting cautionary tale that was absolutely ahead of its time. In this book we are focusing on the relationship between Catherine Earnshaw and Heathcliff. Heathcliff is brought into Catherine's family by her father when he is a young boy. He is an orphan. They grow up together and develop a deep bond, but ultimately some things happen, some decisions are made that lead these characters down a path of revenge. This story deeply explores violence and abuse of power. It's a passionate tale fueled by betrayal, obsession, and a yearning for revenge, which ends up leaving a lasting influence that is passed down through generations. In some ways this book is a love story, but certainly not a romantic one. It's full of toxicity complicity, spitefulness, and tragedy. It's a love story that could have been beautiful, but never was. The characters in this book are extremely chaotic, insufferable, and unlikable. They make cruel and selfish decisions, but that is actually something I really liked about this book. It's a complex character study that dives into the dark side of humanity, and I loved peeling back the layers of these characters to understand what shaped them, and really seeing where their harsh nature stems from. The way this story is narrated through the perspective of Nellie, the housekeeper of Wuthering Heights, is so compelling. It is essentially a story within a story, and because of that, we can't fully trust everything she tells us. There's always this lingering sense of doubt while you're reading this, and that just adds so much depth to the story. This was a passionate, sad, and haunting story, but one that is absolutely brilliant. The characterization is phenomenal, the writing is beautiful and vivid, and overall, this is a true Gothic masterpiece that has left a lasting impression on me. If you're someone who likes classic books and you haven't read this one yet, I highly recommend it. The next book I read was Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir, and I gave this book 5 stars. This book took me by complete surprise, and I absolutely loved it. This was my first ever sci-fi book, so I was a little bit nervous, but this ended up being such a wonderful experience. In this book, we are following our main character, and basically, right at the start, he wakes up in space with no memory of how he got there, why he's there, or even what his name is. And from there, we follow his journey as he slowly starts to piece things together, and we also get some flashbacks into his past. And I thought the plot of this book was so fantastic. It was gripping, it was hilarious, the humor in this book is so good. Our main character is genuinely so funny, and I was laughing so much throughout this book, which I was not expecting for a sci-fi book. There's a lot of mystery surrounding our main character's circumstances, and I thought the way things were revealed throughout the story was perfect. I am not a math or science girl, but those elements are a large part of this plot, so some of that did go over my head, but it actually didn't take away from my enjoyment at all. Even with all of the sciencey space lingo, I was completely immersed and I couldn't put this book down. And while this was a humorous read, it was also such an emotionally impactful and heartwarming read. There is a friendship that forms in this book that is just so wholesome, and it was one of my favorite parts of this story. I also did an immersive read of this book, and I highly recommend doing that. The audiobook was truly amazing. This is one of those books that I will recommend to everyone, even if you're not a sci-fi reader. So if you are interested in getting into the genre, I feel like this is the perfect book to start with. Next, I read The Scattered Bones by Nicole Scarano, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. This is a standalone dark fantasy romance book that is less than 300 pages, and I absolutely loved this. In this book, we are following our FMC Sayla. She embarks on a seemingly impossible quest that defies the gods to find and collect her husband's scattered remains. Basically, a mysterious being called the Stranger approaches her and says that he can bring back her husband if she goes out and collects all of his scattered bones. It's an extremely dangerous mission, but Sayla persists because she would literally go to the ends of the earth for the chance to be with her husband again. This was an absolutely beautiful love story that is filled with utter devotion. The writing is wonderful, and for less than 300 pages, this really packs an emotional punch. The story flowed seamlessly between past and present, it's action-packed, and the forbidden romance was everything. This was a heartbreakingly beautiful, moving, and deeply romantic story that captivated me from the very start. I think this book deserves so much more hype. It is so wonderful, and if you love a tragically beautiful story about undying love, then you definitely need to read this one. Next, I read Sunrise on the Reaping by Suzanne Collins, and I gave this book 5 stars. No notes. This was perfect, and it absolutely ripped my heart out. This is the Hunger Games prequel novel. It is focusing on Haymitch when he is 16 years old, living in District 12 during the 50th Hunger Games, which is a second quarter quell. So instead of having 24 tributes, they actually had 48 tributes in this Hunger Games. And as we already know, Haymitch was in the Hunger Games that year, so we finally get to see what went down during those games. Despite the devastating nature of this book, I could not stop turning the pages. I got lost in the story and in Suzanne's writing. The parallels make this story feel painfully relevant and incredibly powerful. Haymitch is such a complex character, and learning more about him only deepened my love and heartbreak for him. He's intelligent, observant, and perceptive with a huge capacity to love, and discovering who he was before the trauma made everything that comes after hurt so much more. He truly is an unsung hero, and he deserves the world. I also fell in love with so many of these side characters, even knowing what their fate would be, and honestly, every loss in this book felt like a sucker punch. This was just an engaging, heartbreaking, and powerful story that adds so much emotional depth to Haymitch's character. This was a gut-wrenching yet moving read that will haunt me for a very long time, but I highly recommend this one. Next, I read Half His Age by Jeanette McCurdy, and I gave this book 3.5 stars. This is a raw, provocative, and uncomfortable story about a 17-year-old girl named Waldo who becomes involved with her married, creative writing teacher, Mr. Corgi. This book will definitely not be for everyone due to the nature of the content, but it's a story that will undoubtedly spark conversation. Waldo is a very interesting character. She is the portrait of consumerism, and she has a shopping addiction that she thinks will fill the void. She also has a very emotionally unavailable mother, which leads her to seek comfort and validation from the wrong people, and ultimately affects how she she views men and relationships. This was a vulgar and unsettling exploration of the power imbalance of a student-teacher relationship, as well as consumerism, loneliness, family dynamics, and emotional neglect. I think some aspects of this story could have been expanded on, specifically the ending. There are also some scenes in this book that are definitely tough to read, which of course is to be expected with a student-teacher relationship, but definitely some very, very uncomfortable scenes. But ultimately, this is a book that forces you to sit with its discomfort. This is actually Jeanette's debut fiction novel, and I do think it was a really strong debut. I did enjoy her writing and the way she explored some of these themes, and after reading this, I'm definitely excited to see what she will do next. But like I said before, this is a book that I would not recommend to everyone. It is a vulgar and uncomfortable read that explores a student-teacher relationship, so if you are thinking about picking this one up, make sure you know that before going into it. The next book I read is Fruit of the Flesh by Ivy Ophelia, and I gave this book 4 stars. This is a dark gothic romance set in early 1900s New York, and it follows our FMC Petronile. She is a former ballerina who enters a marriage of convenience with sculptor Arcady as a way to escape her family. As always with Ivy Ophelia's books, her prose absolutely blew me away. It's beautiful, gothic, and so atmospheric. There were moments where I found myself wondering what the plot of this book really was, but I simultaneously liked that the story was full of secrets and had a constant sense of foreboding throughout it. And not only is there a lot of mystery in the plot itself, but also surrounding our main characters individually. I think Ivy Ophelia did a wonderful job exploring darker themes of hunger, desire, and control. This book definitely has a large focus on spice and kinks and exploring that. Our main characters, Arcady and Petronile, had me very intrigued, but I do think I wanted a little bit more from their relationship. I wish the two of them had spent more time together communicating. That being said, I really loved Arcady, and I really appreciated how respectful and consensual he was. The last 10% of this book was wild and shocking. I loved the revelations and the horror-ish turns it took, but I do wish the end section had been expanded on further, as it wrapped up very quickly and left me wanting more. Overall, Ivy Ophelia's atmospheric writing really shines here, and I think it is the novel's greatest strength. Despite a few critiques, I did enjoy this, but I do think this is one of those books you need to be in the mood for because, like I said, there's a large focus on spice and kinks. So if you're looking for a spicy romance with beautiful writing, a gothic atmosphere, and elements of mystery and horror, then this would be the perfect book to pick up. Okay, and the last book I read in January was Conform by Ariel Sullivan, and I gave this book 4 stars. I thought this was a great dystopian romance and a strong debut novel. I believe this is the first book in a new series, and the plot was entertaining. I loved the futuristic setting, the cast of characters felt very rich, and the political and societal commentary was powerful. The story takes place in a class-divided dystopian world where the Ilum rule from the clouds and oversee a genetically ranked society. The elite are genetically superior and live in luxury, while those deemed defective are forced below. The minor defects live on the ground, and the major defects live underground. The Ilum also control breeding, and the minors serve as vessels for the elite. I liked our FMC Emmeline in this book, though she is quite naive. For a large chunk of this book, I completely forgot that she is supposed to be 27 years old. She reads much younger, but she did show moments of strength, which I appreciated. There is a love triangle in this book, and I thought it was really well done. I was intrigued by both our MMCs, and I actually felt pretty torn between them. The tension was great, but I do wish we got a tiny bit more from one of our MMCs, but I imagine that will come in the next book. I also really loved the side characters in this book. I felt invested in so many of them. There is a strong subplot involving some of our side characters that completely pulled me in. Overall, I think this was an impressive debut novel. It is meant to be adult, but it did read slightly YA at times, but that didn't really take away from my enjoyment. So I'm really looking forward to the next book in this series. I actually think this is designed to be a very big, expansive series. I think I read that this is meant to be like a series of trilogies, so this is the first book in one of those trilogies. And I know in March there's actually a prequel novel to this book being released. So I'm very excited about this trilogy and this entire series and what's to come with it. I think there's so much potential and I am so excited. Okay, those are all of the books I read in January. As you saw, it was a very well-rounded month. I read so many different genres and I had such a good time doing that. So I can't wait to continue exploring more genres and reading more new books. I really love that I'm branching out in 2026 and not just limiting myself to one particular genre. There are so many books to read and I just love seeing what is out there. As for a favorite this month, it's hard to pick only one. I think if I had to pick, I would choose these 3 as my favorites: Sunrise on the Reaping, Wuthering Heights, and I Who Have Never Known Men. Those 3 books really stuck with me. They mean so much to me now, and they were definitely a highlight of January. That is all for this video. If you've made it to this point, let me know down in the comments what your favorite read in January was. Thank you so much for watching this video and spending some time with me while I went over all of the books I read in January. I hope you enjoyed, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!